Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the Taxpayer Advocate Service. A special welcome and thank you to our presenter today, Sharen Moore. Sharen is a local taxpayer advocate with more than 36 years of experience within IRS functions. I'm your moderator, Renee Goodnow from the New York Small Business Development Center. Our services are made possible by the U.S. Small Business Administration, the state of New York, and our host campuses. If you have any questions during the webinar, please don't hesitate to type them in your chat box and we will answer them as we go. And with that, I will turn controls over to you, Sharen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share the information about our program with hopes that you use our program in the future if you should need it as a resource, and know that there are taxpayer advocates throughout the United States, and we are all so very pleased to give you our information and have you reach out to us. So I want to say, I began working with the IRS 36 years ago. I've worked in almost every function of the IRS, so I'm aware of the internal processes as well as the information that is shared with taxpayers. And my goal here today is to share information about our service so that as a small business owner or member, you could navigate the IRS in a way that makes you comfortable, in a way that protects your rights, and in a way that opens up a dialogue so that you could get the resources you need in just navigating the IRS and your business. And so we are your voice at the IRS in that we make recommendations for changes and systemic processes that really don't help taxpayers to be compliant, or things that really make it more confusing for the taxpayer to understand their responsibilities. The next slide. So who are we? We are independent within the Internal Revenue Service. We are Department of the Treasury employees. The difference between the taxpayer advocate employee and the normal IRS employee is that we report directly to Congress versus the commissioner of the IRS. And we do that because we try to impart some changes in the way IRS does business with taxpayers. Our service is free, and all taxpayers are eligible for the service. What this means by eligible taxpayers is that we do want the taxpayer to attempt to resolve their issues with the IRS by contacting the IRS. But oftentimes, taxpayers can't get through. The phone numbers don't lead you to an individual. It usually leads you to a computer that gives you some kind of message. And so we want people to know that the service is available and free. We are within the IRS, and there's one of us in every state, including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. There are 5 of us in New York State, and we just want you to know we're everywhere you guys are conducting business. So I'm here for you guys in New York, but if you have counterparts in other states, you could also talk to them and make them aware that this is a service that's free and available for everyone. The next slide. So, Nina Olson was the original taxpayer advocate under this current program, and she retired last July. Widget Roberts is now the National Taxpayer Advocate acting behind Nina. And through her leadership, the program has expanded to take on very difficult and trying issues, either throughout the courts or throughout Congress. She's conducted Senate finance hearings and has worked to change a lot of the processes that don't help you guys navigate systems. The next slide. So the National Taxpayer Advocate is located, in Washington, D.C. And like I said, we have offices nationwide, one in every state, including Alaska, Hawaii, the District of Columbia, and one in Puerto Rico. The next slide. So we protect taxpayers' rights. We make sure that when you have an issue with the IRS, that your rights are protected, you are heard, you get to present your information and have someone fairly review and consider it. And where the systems fail, for example, I want to say after the shutdown last year of the federal offices, uh, it was right at the beginning of the filing season, and it created a lot of issues where taxpayers couldn't get the services that IRS offers, and none of our systems operated as they were intended to. And so we stepped in to assist taxpayers in getting their returns processed, getting their refunds, making installment agreements, stopping collection enforcement. Uh, Currently, taxpayers' passports are being decertified and making them unable to travel if they have debts over a certain amount with the IRS. So we've worked with those taxpayers to not only present their information, but remove the liens or levies or remove the certification from their passports so that they'd be able to travel. Uh, some people, even though they have small business, they travel to buy resources, inventory, materials for their business, sometimes out of the country, and it will affect their business if they're unable to travel. So we work with those individuals to be able to conduct their business so that it's not the IRS system or process is not harming the taxpayer or making it so that the taxpayer is unable to make a living. And so when you have that sort of problem where you're unable to get through or there is an issue that is going to harm your business or your family financially because of the way IRS is conducting its business, then we step in and help you so that the process is going to work for you and for the IRS, and so that you're not alone and you understand that you do have rights and someone is there to help you. And because you're a business and not an individual doesn't make it so that you're not protected. You're still entitled to the same protection. The next slide. We also have what is called systemic advocacy, and in that's where we address systemic issues. The fact that there are not enough people answering the phones, there are not enough people looking at how processes impact taxpayers. And so through the systemic advocacy system, taxpayers, individuals like yourselves, are able to go into this website, irs.gov/SAMS, and enter the issue that you're having and let someone from the Taxpayer Advocate Service review it and determine, is this an issue that one individual has, or is this an issue that impacts numerous businesses and would be in the best interest for someone to consider how we can do it differently, how we can make it better for that particular process or issue that the person is dealing with. We make that system available for individuals, but we also ask practitioners, business owners like yourselves, and professional organizations to enter information because you have a perspective that may be different from the individual. So when you're running a business, you may see, well, every year when I contact the IRS or when I do this particular thing, I run into a problem. So you put that onto the system, and there's actually a group of employees who research it. They check and see how that system is running, how many people are impacted by it, and then they make recommendations to Congress to change that process and make it easier for people to navigate. The next slide, please. So, what taxpayers didn't know is that these Bill of Rights were always your rights. We just now publish it in posters so that people visualize that they have these rights when they're dealing with the IRS, and it doesn't matter what the circumstance is. So I'm going to say, if I'm a taxpayer and I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars to the IRS, no, the IRS is not going to be happy about that. But as an individual, I'm still entitled to quality service. I'm still entitled to be informed. I'm still entitled to be treated with dignity. I'm still entitled to a fair and just system. I'm entitled to have an appeal. I'm entitled to challenge what the IRS is saying if I don't agree. And I'm entitled to pay no more than I actually owe. So all of these rights, to retain representation and confidentiality, privacy, all of those rights were always your rights, but people were not aware that they actually had them. And so we publicized them so that people could see you're entitled to this in dealing with the IRS. And in this way, we have an effective tax administration. So we fight to make sure when you're dealing with an issue with an IRS, if you have a revenue officer coming to your business to say you owe X amount of money and we're going to do this thing to you to enforce collections, we're going to say, wait a second. Is there another way to get to that same point without causing harm to the individual? And that's what we're going to work toward with you until you reach finality. Next slide, please. So, how to contact us. In Albany, New York, and the 21 surrounding counties, the phone number to contact us, I'm going to give you my direct office number, which is 518-292-3001. And if you call that number, you're going to reach the Local Taxpayer Advocate office in Albany, New York. Now, the toll-free number you see on the screen, the 877-777-4778 number, is the national Taxpayer Advocate information line. So when you call that number, you'd be speaking to someone from the Taxpayer Advocate Service. It just won't be someone in the local office in Albany. So the website that you see above, the Taxpayer Advocate, irs.gov/contact us, is the Taxpayer Advocate directory where you find all of the locations and all of the phone numbers for all of the Taxpayer Advocate offices throughout the United States.
Sharon, before we go on, can you share the local Albany office number again? I'm going to put it into the chat.
Sure. It's 518-292-3001.
518-292-3001.
Yes. And my intake advocate, her name is Miss Williams. She is available on that phone Monday through Friday. We make sure the phone is answered live so that you're not constantly getting a recording. And should you get a recording and you leave us a message, we will return the call same day.
Great, thank you.
Sure. There is a Form 911, which, a lot of taxpayers complete the form and fax it over to our office, and we establish an inquiry and work with them so that they're not having to contact the IRS any longer. Once we're contacted and we establish a case, we work with the IRS, resolve the issue, we send you notification in writing. The IRS also sends you notification, and oftentimes we're able to resolve the issue to the taxpayers and the IRS's satisfaction. I want to say the Form 911 is not required to get a case in the Taxpayer Advocate Service. You can merely call us and tell us you're having this problem, and we'll take the information down and create a case for you and work with you to resolve it that way. The next slide. So the Taxpayer Advocate Service also has what's called the Low Income Taxpayer Clinics. And in this area, we have one at the Legal Aid Society of Greater Northeastern New York is the Low Income Tax Clinic in this area. And they work with taxpayers who have some sort of controversy issue with the IRS, whether it be from a collection standpoint or an examination or audit standpoint. They work with you as a representative. Their service is free for most taxpayers, and there are times that if you are exceeding a certain income level, there may be a nominal fee to work with you, but they offer free controversy service for low-income taxpayers, and low income for them, I think at this point, is about under $60,000. The website there, taxpayeradvocate.irs.gov/LITC map, will show you the low-income taxpayer clinics in the area and the ones that are closest to you. There are a couple of clinics downstate, and again, in this area, the Legal Aid Society of Northeastern New York is the clinic in this area. Yes, Renee, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we also have what's called the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel, and that panel is a group of independent citizens who apply to volunteer for the panel. On that panel, citizens like yourselves meet up and suggest ways to improve the IRS based upon what they're hearing in their communities. So what you hear in small business may give you pause to say, you know what, if the IRS did it this way, this may help all of us throughout this process. And you get together and discuss ways for improvement. You go to Washington, D.C. once a year for a conference that's paid for by the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel staff, and it's a great opportunity to actually be one of the voices that creates the change in the IRS. And you can go to that website at www.improveirs.org. And, you know, I suggest that you guys consider joining that panel because it is an opportunity to be a part of the change to the things that impact you guys the most. The next slide, please.
Sharon, we had a quick question. Does low income mean that the business makes under $60,000, or does that mean the individual's total income from any source cannot exceed $60,000?
I'm going to say individuals. For businesses, I would go in like they make exceptions, right? Depending on the facts and circumstances, they determine if they can work with someone if their income exceeds the income level, depending on the type of issue that the taxpayer is facing. So, you know, even if you exceeded that amount, I would still reach out to them because sometimes the issue itself warrants them to get involved.
Great, thank you.
The next slide, please. So, the National Taxpayer Advocate creates reports to Congress every year because, again, we report directly to Congress versus the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. And so, in that annual report to Congress, the National Advocate pinpoints the most serious issues taxpayers faced in the previous year. So, in 2019, the National Advocate reported out on the issues that we saw that we worked with taxpayers throughout 2018. For 2020, then we provide what we intend to work on in the subsequent year. So I want to say last year we worked on over 500,000 tax returns that were delayed by the IRS because the taxpayer use their last pay stub instead of their W-2 forms to file a tax return, and the income and withholding information did not match, and so it created a problem where the returns were held up. The IRS did not explain that to the taxpayer, and so the taxpayer ended up reaching out to our offices in order to find out how to correct the problem, and to obtain the refunds that they were rightfully entitled to. So some taxpayers had misreported the income and had to file amended tax returns. And we assisted them to get those returns filed and processed and the correct refunds issued. Some taxpayers never got W-2 forms from their employers. And so it made it difficult to match the income that the taxpayer reported versus what the IRS records showed. And so we stepped in to try to navigate those cases, try to reach out to those employers who had not timely filed their W-2 forms with the Social Security Administration. And so that was one of the number one problems that was reported to Congress for 2019 coming up when we do our congressional visits. Next slide, please.
Sharon, I'm going to upload the PowerPoint, so sorry for all the clicking around that popped up on the screen. We also had another question come in. If you're a small business who can't afford an accountant, where's the best place to look for tax advice for an LLC partnership?
The best thing to do is to go online. IRS has a source of what to look for in the type of representative you choose. We cannot recommend a specific representative because then it would give the appearance that IRS is endorsing an individual. So we don't do that. But we give you the types of things to look for in someone who you want to represent you, right? Now, if you have a problem and you don't know whether you need representation or not, then you could reach out to us and we'll tell you, is that something we could go forward with, or is that something where you actually need a tax representative? Oftentimes, people think they need a representative because they're dealing with the IRS. But the reality is, your representative, he's going to say the same words you're going to say, right? He's going to say, you know, I don't believe this is correct. I'd like someone to review it. I'd like to appeal this decision. I'd like to get someone independent to look at this because I don't agree. The taxpayer could say those same things for free versus paying someone to say those things for them. So sometimes it's a matter of knowing where to look. I always advise people go to the IRS website and look at what fits your situation. And at least you'd be able to, if you feel you have to get a representative, intelligently talk to someone about your situation and know whether or not they're equipped to handle your situation. Because you will already know, well, I looked at this information. I know this is what I need to do. Maybe I don't know how to do that, and this representative is going to help me do that. But when you go to him with your problem, if you're armed with a little bit of information, you know whether or not that person can assist you or if that person is just there to make money off of your problem. I suggest calling us, asking a question, and starting with doing the very little bit of research on your own. Just go to the IRS website, in the search engine, type in the issue you have, and see what that says. And then call us. We'd be happy to answer any questions or take on the case if that's something we could do for you. Does that answer your question?
I just sent a follow-up to see if there was any additional based on that answer. I'll let you know if she responds.
Okay. So you can go to the next slide, and then if they have a question, I'll come back.
Sounds good.
So, some of the key challenges, you know, we need to make sure that taxpayers who cannot afford representation, who are financially vulnerable, get immediate, fair service. And because you're a business doesn't mean you're not financially vulnerable. Most small businesses are financially vulnerable, and that they're trying to make a way for themselves. And usually that means sometimes you may have to employ someone, so you're having to pay someone, you're having to pay for your business. If you don't own the space, you have to pay to rent it. So you are financially vulnerable, and we want to make sure that when you're dealing with the IRS, you get the same fairness as someone who is wealthy and who could hire the best attorney. It's only fair. So we don't want someone who can't afford representation to be mistreated by the process or system. Uh, IRS doesn't always use the appropriate self-service application. So there are things that if IRS made it available on the website for taxpayers to access themselves, it would eliminate a lot of the telephone calls they get uh, to ask questions like for tax return transcripts or copies of tax returns, things that really you could accomplish without uh, uh, getting people to call up and hold on and get disconnected and call back. And also, the lack of funding to the IRS prevents them from providing the type of taxpayer services that taxpayers need. So we go out and try to make up for some of those things by being available, by making sure we are helping taxpayers who are financially vulnerable, by making sure that self-service applications are available and up and running, and making sure that we provide the type of taxpayer service that is needed by the taxpayer and not just what the IRS thinks the taxpayer needs, but actually listening to the taxpayer and providing the service that they need. On the next slide. So, for most taxpayers, like we said, there are millions of taxpayers, the system went just fine. But for the taxpayers who were encouraged by payroll service providers to file that tax return with the last pay stub, or taxpayers who may have worked several jobs and forgot to include a W 2 form on their returns, they didn't get the best service. So, IRS uses narrow performance measures, right? They believe that if the income and withholding was incorrectly reported, the taxpayer must have done something wrong. But the reality is, some taxpayers work multiple jobs, and if you work for a couple of weeks at a job in January, by December you may have forgotten you actually worked at that place this year. So we're trying to change that state of mind where taxpayers are looked at in the negative instead of the positive, and provide education that helps the taxpayer understand the reason IRS may be asking for something, or the reason they need to provide certain information in order to get their returns processed or their refunds issued. For small businesses, uh, my message would be, if you're a small business and it's just you, a sole proprietor, you don't have employees, then it's easier for you to make that return and have your information. But for people with employees, just remember the impact when your return isn't filed, or the W-2s aren't properly submitted to the Social Security Administration, because it does create an additional issue, not only for the taxpayer, but for the business. So we want the business to have all the information possible to make it easier for them to get through the year, file their return, and move on to the next year. So, there are times when businesses have been charged penalties because they hadn't timely file the return. And, sometimes businesses didn't realize that when my income was this amount, I had this filing requirement. Now my income has grown to this amount. My filing and paying requirements may be a little different. And so sometimes they may need a little assistance in explaining that or understanding that. And we want you to reach out. We don't want your business going under because of some tax issue or some compliance issue that we'd be happy to help you through. And we don't look at someone as, well, you put yourself in this situation, so, that's just how you have to deal with them. That really doesn't matter, right? People make mistakes. A lot of things happen that make people non-compliant. Sometimes it's through their own fault. Sometimes it's happenstance, right? This happened and I was not aware of this thing, so I didn't do this thing, right? And so we just make those things happen, get people up to date, move them forward so that they can continue with their business to hopefully grow and be more successful. We want to see businesses growing and not wiped off the map because of a tax issue. The next slide, please.
We had a couple more questions for you, Sharon. Why doesn't the local tax office give answers to a nonprofit organization?
Well, oftentimes the person that's in the local office behind that desk doesn't have enough knowledge about exempt organizations. Exempt organizations are worked in a specific area. It's like a centralized area where they work those type of cases and issues. So when you go into a walk-in office, those people are not equipped to answer those type of questions.
Okay. As a small business, how can one verify if they should be charging sales tax within their business? Is there a person you would recommend they speak with offline to discuss specific area, topic, and type of business we are in?
Well, sales tax, that would be the state. I'm the federal government, so we don't collect sales tax. But for your particular issue, there is a New York State advocate office, and that office should be able to assist you with any of those type of questions.
Okay. And there was another question that came in, a follow-up to the one you answered before. She said that's enough info to get started. From your advice, she's going to call the IRS and have them keep her up to date. And she was wondering if there's a person to talk me through what's expected of me besides the IRS. And that could be something that you could meet with an SBDC business advisor on if you have general business questions, non-related to the IRS. So we could connect on that and I could give you some information there.
Okay.
And I think that was the last one.
Okay, well, for the Taxpayer Roadmap, I would just advise everyone to click on that link and take a look at this roadmap, because this roadmap shows you the different IRS functions and how many steps there are throughout the processes when you're dealing with the IRS. So we created this map with the hopes that any taxpayer who received any kind of notice or letter from the IRS could pick up their letter and go to this roadmap and see where they actually are in the IRS process. It's really for informational purposes to help taxpayers understand how complex the system is, how we work so hard to decrease the number of steps throughout a process so that when taxpayers are dealing with the IRS, they know exactly where to go. In this roadmap, we're hoping to, in the future, create an electronic link so that when you click on the, wherever you are in this roadmap, you're able to find the name, phone number, and office where your letter came from. So that if you need to speak to someone, that would be the number you would call. So we're trying to work on creating that with this roadmap right now, the roadmap just shows you uh, how many functions there are at the IRS and how difficult it is if you're the taxpayer in the middle of that roadmap navigating your way out of it. The next slide. So for priorities for our program for 2020 fiscal year, these are the things we intend to advocate for strongly, in addition to the things we continue to advocate for throughout the year. So we want religious freedom allowances for claiming benefits that taxpayers are allowed. We want the IRS to proactively educate taxpayers versus reactively chastising taxpayers. If taxpayers have enough education, most taxpayers want to be compliant. No one wants to have a letter or issue with the IRS. So we want the IRS to be proactive versus reactive. And actually, proactivity will decrease the burden that's created by being reactive. So when a taxpayer files a tax return and some IRS filters flags that return, the IRS reacts to it in a negative way. Instead of providing education and clarity and availability up front. So we are advocating to be available for the taxpayers who you want to be compliant with the laws that are out there. And we work closely with counsel. We have a staff of attorneys that are available to us when we need legal advice on any issue that may come before us. The next slide, please. So we also now have taxpayers who have been assigned to private debt collection agencies. So small businesses and individual taxpayers who have outstanding debts with the IRS that have gone unaddressed are assigned to these agencies. Taxpayers who have tax debt of $52,000 or more run the risk of having their passports decertified and being unable to travel. And there's also issues with disclosure, voluntary disclosure practices with the IRS, and a lot of it comes from divorced or separated partners wanting information. So these are also things we're going to advocate for. And for small businesses, a part of the issue for the sole business owner, sole proprietor, is that you could face the passport consequences if you should run into having those type of deficiencies. And again, small businesses sometimes get their inventory from overseas, and sometimes the owner needs to travel and be face to face with the people they're conducting business with. So these things we're advocating for because they are extremely harmful to taxpayers, and really IRS is getting the least compliance from doing these things. So because they are being heavy-handed with this type of enforcement doesn't mean it's bringing about the type of compliance they want. And we want the enforcement to be not so heavy-handed so that people are not afraid of the IRS, but more willing to talk to the IRS and get clarity and be able to understand what's happening with their accounts or their returns. The next slide, please. So we are designing notices and letters that come from the IRS that create a simple product. IRS now sends notices with 10 paragraphs on them, and they expect you to be able to decipher which one of those paragraphs apply to you. And so we are currently working to recreate notices and letters that are going out. We are trying to facilitate a digital interaction, create kiosks in the local federal buildings where someone can go up to the kiosk and actually speak to an IRS employee and ask questions and get answers face to face with someone, even if they're not in the building, but still a live meeting with an IRS employee. And we're encouraging the IRS Appeals Office to be available in more areas. Right now, they're available in New York City, large cities and metropolises. We need them to be in more rural areas because all taxpayers are entitled to that same face-to-face interaction, and there's no way to get that if you're in a rural area because the appeals office is not in your area. So we want, and it's not that you can't file an appeal, you can file an appeal, but you can't walk in and sit down and talk with someone and have a face-to-face meeting with that person. The next slide, please. So, we analyze cases to identify ways to strengthen the earned income tax credit. I want to say a lot of people who have their own individual self-employed businesses have difficulty verifying their income, so the IRS sometimes will not allow the earned income tax credit because they feel the taxpayer hasn't verified that the income was earned. And so we're working with them to uh, strengthen the advocacy in those EITC cases where taxpayers entitled to the credit should be getting the credit. Taxpayers who run businesses are not always wealthy taxpayers. Some taxpayers are living pay to pay, just like an employed individual, except they're outside doing it without the benefit of an employer. And when they're entitled to these credits, we want them to get them. And, we also want the process for exempt organization applications. Right now, there's a 1023-EZ that is being filed by many people, but it doesn't provide the appropriate information for determining if an organization should be recognized as exempt or not. And so that's another thing we're working on because even though, these organizations, most of them come about to assist people, some of them don't, and we don't want organizations for profit operating as exempt organizations. And our belief is that any tax impropriety harms everyone, and so we're trying to make it so that the IRS properly reviews those applications and allows the exemption for organizations actually not for profit and there to help the community. Next slide, please. So, in our objectives report, which is what we provide each year to say what we're going to do in the future year. So we're going to measure the characteristics of the taxpayers who qualify for TAS but do not seek our assistance. So there are taxpayers out there with tax issues, afraid, and they need our service, but they don't come to us. And I think sometimes that's because taxpayers believe, well, you're IRS employees. You're just going to tell them everything they need to know to make life hard for me. But that's not our job. Our job is not to report on the taxpayer in a negative way. It is to assist the taxpayer to resolve any issues that they're having. However, we need to do that within the parameters of the law. We want to study compliance effects. Like IRS puts a ban on people who claim the earned income tax credit that they feel are not entitled to it. And any small business owner could find themselves in that situation where they are entitled to the credit, but for whatever reason, IRS isn't accepting their return as an accurate return. And then we step in to help that taxpayer by letting them know the different types of substantiation they could get, the alternative documents they could get to substantiate that they are entitled to the credit. And we work with them to correct the math error notices and to make sure that when we're using the collection system letters, because they have automated letters that come out, we want the letter to be, if the letter's going to be automated, we want it specific to the taxpayer's issue and not something when the taxpayer reads it, they're not sure which situation applies to them. Next slide. So, We have a large social media presence, and there's a lot of information available on the Taxpayer Advocate Service website. Um, I advise everyone just take a look at that, because even if you don't need the service right now, everyone is a notice away from having an issue with the IRS. And it could be anything, to a math error, to a keystroke error, to something we may not have understood with the changes in the tax laws and forms. And so know that not only are we available to help you, um, just look and see how you could help yourself. And that when you look online and you just take a look at those things, you see what you're entitled to as an individual or as a business, and know, okay, when I contact the IRS, I already know I'm entitled to a certain thing, and not accept less than that. The next thing. Okay, so before we get to questions, I want to say, how is this relating to small business, right? Earlier, I said that we worked over 500,000 tax returns for taxpayers who did not have the correct income reported, or who had income that did not match the IRS records. And so, as small businesses, you could talk to your employees and say, make sure your income information is properly reported. If you have more than one job, don't forget to include that other W-2 form. And all of that is not to come down on them about taxes, but it's to ensure that when they file their tax returns, the IRS immediately processes that return and issues that refund, and the taxpayer could just move on with their life instead of making a small error that will take sometimes months in dealing with the IRS to correct. So, taxpayers who not only have financial hardship, but if you've contacted the IRS and you've been waiting for a response from them, they told you we're going to get back to you within 30 days. 30 days has come and gone. You haven't heard from anyone, and now we're at another 30 days. You should be reaching out to us. And then we could help you resolve whatever the issue may be. So, we also want small businesses to be aware that if there is documentation you may need to substantiate your tax return or anything like that, and you don't have it, you could always go back to recreate it. Go back to the people you did business with and say, you gave me a receipt on this day for XYZ. I'm not sure what happened with that, but can you please give me a copy of that information, so that you could present your information in a way that makes IRS make a judgment in your favor versus against you, and we're here to help you with that. So with that, I want to say thank you so very much for taking the time today to listen to me. Know that we are available and we're ready and willing to assist at any time, and that it was a pleasure to be able to be here and talk with you guys today.
Thank you very much, Sharon. We do have some good questions that have rolled in. The first one, is there a set percentage amount of earnings that a small business should set aside for taxes? I'm a new business owner that started my business last year. Earnings were under 40,000 for 2019.
I would always set aside, like, it depends on what your earnings are going to be. Like right now, I've always set aside a little something, right? Because if you have to come up with anything, you have to come up with less than you would have. And if you don't, that's even better. You have a little savings for yourself. But I'd always set a little something aside, because you never know what you may earn in any quarter. Like, let's say you're not earning too much in the first and second quarters, but now summer's here, everybody's out spending, or maybe not so much in the first quarter, but once individuals start getting their income tax refunds, they go out and spend money. And so you may make more, in the next quarter than you did in the previous.
If they wanted to kind of set up that plan to pay those quarterly earnings, how would they go about doing that?
You could just go online and fill out the form and make quarterly estimated tax payments. And that's just like a payment in advance, right? That's sitting there. So when you file that tax return, that is your tax already paid up front, and anything overpaid is refunded.
Okay. And could they get that form at irs.gov? Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay. What's the most common mistake or misunderstanding that you come across that folks can avoid?
The most common mistake is that uh, sometimes people think, well, I'm running a business, so obviously I have expenses, but they don't uh, want to verify any of the expenses. And so that's the toughest thing we run into, because we need something to advocate with other than just our words, because uh, then no taxpayer is going to verify anything. They're just going to tell us that they're entitled to it, and then we go with that, and that harms our credibility. So I want to say it's mostly people, like one gentleman told me, well, I run $1 million business. I don't have time to keep records. I'm like, that's when you have to keep them the most. So that's the toughest thing we run into. But it's not insurmountable. When taxpayers don't have tax records, then we sit with them and try to figure out how can we recreate this document in a way that IRS accepts it. And we just try to make sense of uh, the information before us. And if you have a reasonable explanation, oftentimes it is considered. Even if they say, okay, well, I see you claimed $15,000 for vehicle expenses. You verified $9,000 of that expense, uh, and you explain to them, well, this is what happened. You explain what happened, and maybe they accept your explanation, or maybe they say, okay, well, I'm going to allow half of the additional expense that's not verified. But something is better than nothing, and we just try to work with you so that you get something versus nothing.
Okay. This person, as a business owner, they have to place themselves on payroll, which leads to them being double taxed. If they don't put themselves on the payroll, the banks do not acknowledge their income, even if their income has been the same each year. Is there something they can do different?
I would put an explanation with the return that I submit, because banking rules sometimes create situations for us that we wouldn't be in otherwise. Like, you have to have certain information a certain way for the bank to process. So I'd put an explanation with that, but that's something, if you send to me in an email, I could do a little research on that, because if you're experiencing that issue, I can't imagine how many other taxpayers are experiencing the same issue. And it's something that, as a taxpayer advocate, we could work toward remedying for everyone. How do we go about um, having the bank understand that I am the business owner, and so I would be treated differently versus, an employee or the income? Because again, you're going to say, I'm a sole business owner, so this is my income, but then on that tax return also shows an income, which is unfair. So I would like that if you could send that to me in an email, and I'll give you my email address. That's something I'm going to look at, because I don't know how many other taxpayers are facing that same issue, and we can resolve it for all of you.
Great. And I can type your email in, or you can put it in the chat box, Sharon, if you see that pop up on your screen.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, but so if you guys see my name there, Sharon Moore, I'm Sharon.Moore at IRS.gov, and I'm going to just go ahead and type that in.
Great. And the next question, do sole proprietors need to pay quarterly taxes?
It depends on the income, right? Oftentimes, there's not enough income that's requiring you to file and pay quarterly. Do you have employees?
Let's see if they follow up. The next question might help answer that one too. I registered my incorporation business late last year. I didn't make any sales yet, but I opened a bank account. Do I need to file a tax return for the business?
You may have to file a return showing zeros just so that IRS is not going to say you are missing your filing requirements.
Okay. And the person before, the sole proprietor question on paying quarterly taxes, they don't have any employees.
So no, they shouldn't have to pay quarterly.
Okay. And they said thank you. And then for the person that opened the bank account on filing a tax return for the business, do they file a separate return?
What do you mean? For the business or for themselves?
For the
They have a,
business.
all right, they have a separate account for the business and one for themselves. Are they asking, do they have to file a tax return for the business?
Yes. Yep. Separate from themselves.
They could file a Schedule C, which is a part of their own tax return. Um, Now, if they withholding? Do they have individual independent contractors working for them or employees working for them? Because some of those things would determine whether or not.
No employees.
Schedule C. Okay, wait. I think I'm answering more than one question here because I'm looking at the screen and I'm looking at
Hmm.
this.
That's okay. I was typing in what you said too.
Okay. Okay. So the Schedule C, is that where we left off?
Yep.
The Schedule C is a part of the 1040. It's just one of the schedules, and so that would be a part of their own return.
Okay, so they wouldn't have to file a separate one. They have no employees and no contractors. They added as well.
Right. That's not a separate return. It's just a schedule that they add to their own return.
Yep. And we just had another question about the slides being available. You can download them right now under the handouts section in the GoToWebinar sidebar. You can download that right now. And on the Schedule C, they said thank you.
You're welcome.
And then we had a question if the TAS charges for their services.
Our service is totally free.
Great. If we shouldn't pay quarterly taxes as a sole proprietor, when do we pay taxes?
At the end of the year.
Okay.
Quarterly tax could also be for an individual, right? Depending on, let's say my tax was $18,000 last year, and this year my tax is going to be $23,000, but I only paid $18,000. I should have paid estimated tax payments so that I don't have a large tax bill at the end of the year, right? So quarterly payments aren't only for business, but it's also so that you don't get penalized at the end of the year if you haven't paid your tax by April 15th. So the example I'm going to use again is if I make a small amount of money the first 2 quarters and the third and fourth quarters, I make much more than I even expected to make, right? That's not going to be a problem because by April 15th, I'm going to pay my tax in full. But let's say in January, the first 2 quarters, I make way more than I expected, and I continue along that path throughout the year, then you may want to make some estimated tax payments so that at the end of the year, your tax isn't so much more than what it would have been had you not been so successful. And that's just so that at the end of the year, you don't find yourself with a huge tax debt and you're unable to pay it on time. And obviously, there are plenty of people who don't pay on time, but you don't want the penalty and interest charges that come along with uh, the late payment. So, I really just would advise if you see you're making a lot more for a time that you normally didn't, you make it just write out a check. You can send an estimated tax payment for 2000, let's say, let's say we're in June of this year and you made a lot of money. You could write a check to the IRS and ask them to apply it to the next year's return so that you have almost like a withholding set up with the IRS already in doing that.
Great. And where's your office located again?
I'm at the Leo O'Brien Federal Building. We're right on Clinton and North Pearl, right across from the Palace Theater. We're in the same building as the Social Security Administration.
Very good. We
We're going to
might have one more question coming in. Oh, what's the exact address? I can type it out.
11A Clinton Avenue.
Albany, New York.
Yes, and that's the Leo O'Brien Federal Building.
You'll have to excuse any spelling error or spelling errors. 11A Clinton Ave, Albany, New York. Leo O'Brien Federal Building.
Yep, and that's perfect. I'm in room 354. I'm on the third floor. And again, the phone number is 518-292-3001.
518-292-3005.
One.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. If someone's in Manhattan, do you have a recommendation on if there anyone they can meet in person?
There is a local taxpayer advocate in Manhattan. They're located at 290 Broadway.
Okay. And how would folks find out about other office locations? Is that on the irs.gov website?
That the website that you click at the beginning of the PowerPoint about us uh, has all the office locations throughout the United States. And if you don't find that, you can call us, and we don't mind. You know, if someone contacts us wanting to know where their local advocate is, we don't mind just giving them the information.
Okay, great. I think that might have been the last question, Sharon. I appreciate it.
I'm so grateful to you guys for being available today and finding out about our program. I just want to remind you that it's not only for small business, it's also for individuals. So anyone you know or yourself could feel free to contact us, and we'd be happy to provide our services